All right. We are live. Hello and welcome this evening. Again, welcome for joining us. We are doing another great speaker for the Dream Hour Descendant Speaker Series of 2021. Today, or this evening, I have with me Vance Blackfox, and I'm just going to read off his bio a little bit here. Vance Blackfox, a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, is the Director of Communications for the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. He has held executive director positions at the Haskell Foundation in Oaks Indian Mission, and most recently served as the communications director for Native Americans in Philanthropy. Vance has previously served as both president and treasurer of the board of directors for the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, as well as guest curator for the Indian Museum at the University of Texas at San Antonio Institute of Texan Cultures. He is also presently the Indigenous,
Mhm.
theologian for the,
Theologian.
say it again?
Theologian.
Theologian, thank you,
Mhm.
for the faith-based initiative for the city of San Antonio, where he currently resides. So thank you for joining us, even though I had a
Yeah,
little tongue twister there.
you're fine. You're fine. It's not a word that people say every day.
Yes.
So,
But all right, well, I'm going to kick it to you. The floor is yours.
well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And I also want to thank DreamWeek for providing this amazing background so I can wear something other than black on the screen today. And just want to say Osio and Ulisti to all the people who joined us this evening. So far, it looks like it's all my best friends. Some of the greatest people in my life are joining us this evening. So most of these folks have heard actually a lot of the things I'm probably going to say this evening, but they'll just have to hear it again. So thank you for Dream Week and for you hosting me this evening to talk a little bit about what it means to be in this place. So I think I want to talk a little bit about that. But first, before I start talking about this place, I need to honor this place and I need to honor the people who are from this part of the world originally, whose land has been stolen from them. And so I need to honor the Coetecan people and particularly the Pilam Nation and the Tonkawa peoples as well. Just today, I had the chance to go up to the top of the park at Comanche Lookout Park, where we had some new Indigenous public art in place here in San Antonio, and was able to say some prayers and to offer some good medicine, including tacos, for the goodness and the graciousness that Coetecan and Tunco people are to share this land with us. And so just really grateful for that, but it's important for all, whenever we gather, to share good words and honor those people whose land this is, as well as the land itself. And so we give thanks also to Mother Earth for everything that she provides us. And that kind of leads right into some really cool stuff that I've been thinking about for some time. I see that we have on the line my mother. My mama is on here, and so I guess what I would say as I lead into this is that we are from somewhere, right? And I don't come to this particular presentation without saying that, you know, I am the son of Anita and the grandson of Sharon and the great grandson of Oklahoma and the great great grandson of Bertha and the great 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 grandson of Anna. And it's important for me as a Cherokee person in particular to recognize that these women, these incredible Cherokee women, have been are the roots of my story and have given me the strength and continue to give me the strength to journey on in this world, giving of myself in the ways that I might, as best as I can. So I want to say that everyone has a story, and we're here in this place. I also see that we have online here Ramon Vasquez, my friend Ramon, whom I cherish so much and haven't had a chance to spend much time with over the last year, which has just been hard, we often get to share tacos and enchiladas and other good foods at fun places. And so, so we've talked a little bit about this, and I think it's important to recognize that that Ramon and other folks who whose people are from this place, the Poitecan folks in particular, this is their place. And so I am always cognizant as a Cherokee person who now calls San Antonio home, that I also recognize that this isn't my place. This is a place that I've come to that has become my home and that I cherish greatly and have for many years. In fact, I lived here and then moved away and then realized I shouldn't have moved away maybe, but I'm glad I did. But like, I've always been working to get back to San Antonio. And I've always been drawn to the amazing story and resiliency of the Indigenous peoples that have been here. And I've always said that I want to help lift those stories up. And so those stories about this particular place are old, very, very old, from time immemorial. A lot of folks like to date us as Indigenous peoples to say, oh, well, they were here for a certain amount of years, 10,000 or 33,000 or whatever that number might be from Western science is digging around in our graves. But the reality is that our creation stories happen here. And I do believe and trust that the creation stories of the Poitecan and Tonkawa peoples and other Indigenous folks, their creation stories are a part of this land, a part of the dirt, part of the earth, part of Mother Earth, and they come from this place. And I'm really, really happy to be able to share and to promote those stories and to help us recognize in this city we now call San Antonio, that was once called Yanaguana, more prevalently, that this indeed is a place that the rest of us have come to, and that we have been lucky and blessed by all those generations of folks before us who've cared for this land. And so we all have these stories, and we all want to take time to share those stories. We all have those familial stories. We all have those anecdotes. We all have those creation stories. Many of us might have creation stories that are more related to the Christian creation story. But the reality is that no matter the story that we hold for ourselves or for our family, or that we pass down from generation to generation presently, they are ours and we value them. Unfortunately, as San Antonio became a city 300 years ago, maybe even before that, as Indigenous peoples were pushed into missions here, those stories began to become erased, forgotten, and considered invaluable by non-Native people in particular, by the church, by soldiers, by people who had come and invaded this place and then settled here as well. And so for me, as an Indigenous person from another place, I always want to lift up the fact that it's important for us to remember that those stories that belong to the Indigenous peoples here are stories that we need to be seeking as well. We need to be hearing the Indigenous folks telling those stories. We need to hear those people out, hear the folks who know those stories and love those stories. We need to let them become a little bit a part of our story. Not to own them, but rather to strengthen our ties also to those people who have the knowledge, who have the care and love in their DNA of this place. Yet we are still, and what we call this home, still the folks who came here. And as we come here, we need to open ourselves up to the folks who have the wisdom, who carry the wisdom, and realize that we are in fact the other, the outsider in some regard. That's hard for folks to understand and to realize. I think about me as a Cherokee person and my family as Cherokee people and how we were removed on the Trail of Tears from the eastern part of what's now the United States. I mean, our land base was huge. It was bigger than Texas. It was Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina and Virginia and Maryland and Kentucky and Tennessee, parts of Tennessee and parts of Alabama, Mississippi. I mean, it was huge, and we over time lost that land through our negotiating or not negotiating with settlers, with colonial settlers, with the pre-United States folks, and then of course the federal government of the United States. Forcing us then finally to move. And so moving into Oklahoma, sometimes on our reservation, the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, we sometimes forget that in fact that land wasn't ours originally. We're thankful for it. But I think sometimes we need to recognize that there were Caddo people and Osage people who were living there, and whose stories are there as well. And so I think that's why I also am very passionate about sharing the need for all of us to consider where we are, and how we can call that certain place home, but that in fact it is indeed someone else's land. And we've got to honor that and cherish that for our own healing, and for our own growth. I will say that as I've been welcomed into this city multiple times and over the years, as a resident, as someone who's come to this place home, and has been given space to do work here, I'm grateful. But I also think about the Cherokee folks that came here before I did. And what I mean by that, I'm talking way back. I'm talking about a person that a lot of folks don't recognize or realize was Cherokee by adoption, and that was Sam Houston. I mean, some folks maybe in San Antonio know that, but a lot of folks don't know that the first president of Texas, right, and the former president of Tennessee had lived with the Cherokee people twice, not once, twice, and had been adopted Cherokee, and then made his way to Texas, obviously, and went through the revolution, and then became president, the first president here, and had been called in to work alongside him, not just Mexican people and mostly Texan people, quite frankly, but also Cherokee people. And while that we can stand on either side of that revolution, right? And that's a whole nother presentation that someone else is probably going to give this week. That we recognizing that Indigenous peoples oftentimes are left out of those stories of the Alamo, of the revolution, and on both sides, the Mexican side and the Texan side. And then of course, the United States side. Sam was I say Sam, like he's my kin, but he might be, right? But President Houston, and then was someone who advocated for Indigenous peoples in Texas. And so who was his opponent? His opponent for those first, what was it, 12 years or more, was President Lamar, who was the second president of the state of Texas. And who was it that was the biggest proponent, the biggest fan of getting rid of all the Indigenous peoples in Texas? It was Lamar, mostly because he really hated Sam Houston, but also probably hated Indian people. But there are so many people throughout our history that hated Indian people. And even if they didn't hate us like maybe Lamar might have, to want to get rid of us, to get rid of the Indian problem in Texas, even if they're people who seemingly cared for us and wanted to see us do well and do good, helping us with the assimilation process, as much as that seems like a caring process, really wasn't. It also was a form of hate as well. So I think about Sam Houston. I also think about Sequoyah. For those of you who don't know who Sequoyah was the man, the genius, who, when he was still in northern Georgia, had developed the writing system for the Cherokee people, who had never spoken English, had never written in English, and was only a Cherokee speaker, and created a system of writing for us. And so that advanced us in great ways that actually caused probably the greater fear of white people in the federal government who want to remove us to Indian territory over time. And but when we were moved, I mean, Cherokees went to Oklahoma, or what was to become Oklahoma, and Indian Territory, but there were other places in where Cherokee people went. And some went to Texas, northern Texas, some went to central Texas, some went to Mexico, thinking, we're not dealing with this, we're out. We don't want to have anything else to do with this place called what's going to become the United States of America. And so we'll go to Mexico. Where there was a lot of, quite frankly, progressive freedoms compared to what the United States was building for themselves here at the time, and a lot of less oppression toward Indigenous peoples in particular, and quite frankly, Black people, right? No slavery in Mexico. And so, so there was a group of Cherokees who went to Mexico, and Sequoyah made his son and another relative bring him to Mexico. It had already come, I believe it had already become Texas at the time, where it was about on the verge to become Texas, but there was hostility still in the air from different factions. And so he laid out and hid out in Wimberley and sent his son, because he was an elder and wasn't very healthy, quite frankly, and sent his son on ahead and said, because they had to ask for permission to move on through into Mexico, right? Without any endangerment, and they secured that permission and then brought Sequoia into San Antonio, and then on to Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras, and a little further in where those Cherokee folks were, and that's where he died. But to think about the footsteps of Sequoia, this incredible leader, this ingenious man who loved Cherokee people enough to go find them, to seek them out, to let them know they're still loved. He walked through this place. So it's kind of holy land for some of the rest of us as well. But in San Antonio, there are for different reasons, for different stories. But San Antonio is populated by thousands of other Indigenous peoples today, from a variety of tribes. And Ramon and his group, American Indian Texas, so the Spanish colonial missions, they have that information, and they're conscious of the fact that they share this space also with other Indigenous peoples, and I'm grateful for that. In fact, my cousin, my Choctaw cousin, who's online tonight with us, Sarah, was born and raised here. This is her home. She knows this is not her land or her place, but she was born here, and this is home for her. And she continues to be an advocate for Indigenous folks here, both the original people and the folks who've come to live here over time. So these thousands of folks, Indigenous peoples, tend to be forgotten, that we even exist. That happens all over the United States. But I just really think it's sad that a place that a city like San Antonio, which was built upon the backs, literally, upon the graves of the Indigenous people, the Coitecan folks, and others, forget about those original folks, but also even today, forget about that many people didn't even exist. I'm not saying that everybody does, but a large majority of folks do. And so we've got to shift that. And as I do work with other organizations, like, I'm constantly thinking about, what does it mean to heal? What does it mean to heal? How do we do that? And I think that the first step, and I promoted this for years now, that the first step is to tell the truth, to really acknowledge what that truth is and lift it up and push it forward, and to own it as truth. A lot of times when Indigenous peoples around the world start truth, because the colonial settler project or colonizers or people in power today, whom are also descendants and or connected to that colonizing settler project, don't want to lose power, right? Don't want to step out of the way, don't want to return to the past, because they have to acknowledge then the truth about their complicity, not just their ancestors' complicity and the privilege that they have inherited, but also then the complicity of their not acknowledging it themselves today. And so, so I think about that a lot. I think about the importance of us telling the truth, and continue to want to support the Coitecan communities that are still working here to tell that truth to the city, to be a voice on behalf of them at times if I can. If I'm honored to do such, and whenever I can, I want to do that. And so how do the rest of us in San Antonio begin doing that in big ways? Telling the truth. And two, I mean, for multiple reasons. One, so that Coitecan folks are lifting up, certainly, but also that the healing of non-Indigenous peoples can happen, right? The acknowledgement, the connection to their own stories, and recognizing that this one really isn't theirs, at least the one that connects them to this land. But at the same time, if we lift up the wisdom and center the wisdom of Indian people, Coitecan folks, Tonkawa folks in this place, we are going to find ourselves understanding how better to live in this place and how to appreciate it even more. How to love it in ways that we can't even imagine, because a lot of us have never been connected to our own place. And so that can bring us some healing. That can bring us some advancement in our understanding of how to be one with the original people, but also the land that they cared for and loved for generations, and still continue to care for and love today. Man, I want that healing. I want to understand that better. So I'm just really grateful for DreamWeek. I'm grateful for this opportunity to be in this place to in this space of Zoom, and to share kind of my perspective on it as someone who loves San Antonio with all my heart, and has pined for it in the past and continues to want to support the growth and the healing of the people that are here, both the original Indigenous folks, but also the folks who are now here with us, right? Including myself. How do we do that? How do we make San Antonio the city that's a city that can be the example of how to do that best? And I've challenged folks for the last 3 or 4 years to think about that. How do we become the example? How do we do that in ways that are fantastic? We do a lot of things in really great ways. We do DreamWeek, right? We do Fiesta. we do a variety of other things in this city that are just pretty great, and a lot of places in the world look to us and cherish this spot. But I think this is another area that we can really do a lot of great work in. So I guess what I'll finish with, because I know I just have a few more minutes here, is to talk a little bit about what it would mean for us to move into a conversation of a formal truth and healing process. And some of those conversations are being had around the city. And what does that mean? And for whom? Right? A lot of processes, a lot around the world internationally, a truth and reconciliation. I should say that I changed the word to truth and healing process over truth and reconciliation, because I believe that healing keeps us all engaged, whereas reconciliation sometimes lets folks off the hook. But those TRCs, so truth and healing, truth and reconciliation conversations and processes in South Africa and New Zealand and Canada, it's going to happen in Australia soon and other places. They are focused on Indigenous peoples. In the United States, as a result of the murder of George Floyd and all the other things that have been happening to African American folks, Black folks, that has shifted a bit, right? There's a need for folks for people in the United States to focus on the needs and reparations maybe of Black folks, with Black people here in the United States. In different cities, there's a different need, different type of conversation, like Ferguson, right? And Nashville and other places. But in San Antonio, I think it can be both. But I think it can be both. I think there's it's time for us to consider what it would mean to begin this formal process of truth and healing. And I believe that it would have to start with a very hard truth. And that very hard truth is acknowledging those missions. The Alamo, Espada, Concepcion, Jose, I always forget the last one. But those missions and not negate the good that they've done over the years for those who've chosen to remain Christian in those places, but rather to acknowledge the fact that the onslaught of Spanish people, Mexican people, and people in the United States, people from Texas and the United States, eventually had a huge effect on the extinction of some indigenous peoples, and then had a huge effect on the assimilation and the loss of identity for Coahuiltecan folks. A lot of them, not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them. And so, how do we shift that? But at the same time, the largest slavery outfit in the United States was in Cibolo, Texas. And we've got to acknowledge that. And I think there's opportunity to do that. And I think that we will all benefit from that wonderful opportunity if that could come to fruition, to really inspire not just people in our city, if we could make it happen here. And some will doubt that we can. That's okay. That's why we need one, probably, right? A process like truth and healing. But also, I'd love to show the world that San Antonio is considered a diverse city and values this diversity in ways that maybe other cities don't. And we want to enliven that, grow that, strengthen that, and inspire others to be that as well. So I think that's what I'll end with. And I'm just really thankful for the opportunity again to share. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. You You said a lot. You dropped a lot of great jewels, as my nieces and nephews would say. You definitely dropped some jewels. You gave me some homework too. I am
All
definitely
right.
have to look up more on Sequoia.
Mhm.
So you definitely gave me some homework there, but I think you spoke to a lot of us there. Truth and healing. I am going to take that. I'm going to run with that phrase. I'm going to engrave it on my heart for 2021. I-
Great.
yes, truth and healing. It
Sure.
will move mountains, just having the
Mhm.
truth, recognizing the truth.
Yeah.
So I'm right there with you.
Good. Good. We
So,
just one more tidbit. You know, this past year, well, in the last couple of years, we finally had Indigenous women elected to the House of Representatives in the U.S. federal government, right? And just the last 4 months in October, Representative Deb Haaland passed, or not passed, but presented rather the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian boarding schools. In the United States and the act itself. And so so that's also, so it didn't quite make it to the place it needed to make it, but we're ready and preparing
yes,
for pushing that forward in the future. And what I hope for people to understand is that when we do that and we focus, yes, on boarding schools, because that really does affect the whole of our society, and I get that's another presentation as well, but it isn't just about boarding schools. It's about what led up to it, and also how it affected the rest of us in society, and how do we heal from the effects and the impacts. So be watching for that too.
yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Mhm.
And so we want to wrap this up with a few questions. With our audience here, if you have a question, please type it into the Q&A bar and we will try to get to it. So to get us started, um, could you give some advice? Give some advice
Mhm.
to someone who has maybe going through some of these struggles right now. They're trying to be more in touch and, be more comfortable with this side and live in their truth. What
Yeah.
advice would you give someone?
Yeah, it's yeah, tons of advice I could give. I guess the couple of jewels, right, that I think I like to drop is that you can't stop working, right? So if you're looking for how best to understand yourself because of the lack of connection to your ancestors or your heritage, or and then the separation of knowledge. I think about Mexican people in particular, right? Mexican people who are now taking, or Mexican Americans also, who are taking the DNA tests and confirming that they have indigenous blood. You know, Mexico didn't record indigeneity, right? Didn't record blood quantum the way the United States did, and that's just the fact. That's just it, right? And so I think about those folks and others, and what I say is don't stop working nonetheless, right? Even though you may not be able to understand what tribal group you come from, doesn't mean that you can't be in solidarity or appreciate the heritages that come from Mexico, even if Mexico is northern Mexico and what is now the United States. So learn about all those indigenous peoples. I don't just learn about one. I do not just learn about one indigenous people. I want to know about as many indigenous groups as I possibly can. And so that's one thing I'd offer maybe an indigenous person or a person who's looking for their identity, whether it be, maybe it's Black, right? It's a Black person who, some folks are able to trace their connection back to Africa with certain tools, right? And not everybody, but some. But even if you can't, know that history, right? Know what the possibilities could be, and understand that journey, and embrace what you can, not claiming it as your own maybe all the time, but appreciating it more, and tying yourself to that experience in even greater ways because you have the information. That's what I would offer for folks who are looking for their own identity, for maybe non-native people, right, who or wanted to be allies. I would say you have to work even harder. I'm always joking with folks that Man, I had to read about every white person, it feels like, when I was in school, right? Or the books that I received in college to read was always about white people. And so I read these books because I had to read these books, right? Sometimes I pushed back a little bit. Sometimes that resulted in something good, and sometimes not. But white people, non-native people, never had to read about Indian people. Rarely ever, right? We'd hear about Pocahontas and Sacagawea, maybe, right? Sitting Bull, maybe some other famous chiefs, but not one book was read. And so, and if you did, you're lucky, and it was just one or two, right? And maybe there's some teachers who are doing better today, and I'm thankful for that, right? And I support that and want to be supportive as best I can. I'm doing a workshop for a class, on Thursday for a class in California because they're wanting to learn more about boarding schools. But read, watch the documentaries, right? Find workshops. I do workshops on the side, right? To teach about not just the history, but also that we're present today and what our experience is like today and how you can be an ally for the issues or concerns and the continued the continued colonial project that we're, an ally to fight against the continued colonial project that we're still dealing with today. The oppression that we still experience, the poverty and and all the other things that come with all that we're experiencing. You can, but you gotta do your homework. You gotta read. You gotta outread me, right? That's what I hope for. I know you won't, but you gotta try, and you gotta start on that journey. I think about, just now, my mom and I, when we were hanging out over Christmas time, very carefully. I quarantined for I went to see her, just so everybody knows. And so, but we were watching things like Gandhi, right? Because I want to know more about people in India. We're watching, The Long Road to Freedom, or I can't remember, maybe that's the book's name. But about Nelson Mandela. And so now I'm reading the books, right? So I want to read the books because I need to know more about people who are different than me. And I think that gives us an opportunity also to not just understand and to be good allies, but to have more compassion for all people who are different than we are, to have more care for and love for people who we share the surface of Mother Earth with.
Yes, definitely. Let's see, we have another question here. It says it's from Jeff, and he asks, in your opinion, which Native American is most influential in the start of positive change in the nation?
Ooh, dang. Well, I want to say this. So I'll say this. So Jeff is an incredible person. He has a great name, Jeff Robbins, but he has also got a great Cherokee name. We call him the Legend. So I'm guessing he's setting me up, and I should just answer that he is, the greatest influence in Indian country for positive change. And I would give him some of that credit, but that's my brother. And he always asks these amazing questions. And so thank you for those questions, for challenging me, even if it's a little bit of picking on me at the same time. I think if you're talking about presently, maybe in the recent history, there are tons of folks. There's so many people that we could list, but I'm going to go with my favorite, who is on that list, and I think it's not going to be a surprise to some folks who are listening, but it's Vine Deloria Jr. Now, Vine Deloria Jr. wasn't necessarily on the front lines with activists, but he made sure that people were on the front lines during the Civil Rights Movement, but in particular the American Indian Movement, which happened in about the same time, 60s and 70s. But he was the philosopher. And so they protected him, and they wanted him to espouse the wisdom and knowledge that, and to write it, and to put it into words, so people would have something to verbalize in the midst of the action, right? In the midst of the debate. And so, again, there's many people on that list, but I'm going to name him. He's also, a hero of mine as a Lutheran Indigenous theologian himself. He also inspired us as theologians to really think about how we exist as Christians who are Native today, but also how we exist as non-Christian in this place, and what is it we need to be sharing with the world, and what is it that we need to keep a little sacred and away from the world. But the things we share are just as important as sacred. It's just that they're shareable, and we want to do that. We want to help the world heal, and he challenged us to do that. So not only did he say, hey, we need to get what we need to get, right? We need to get what's ours, and to begin talking this reclamation stuff, right? Of land, of identity, of sovereignty, and all those things. But he also said we need to also, though, offer these gifts in a good way to non-Native people who need to heal. And so, so I'm going to say that, that's my answer. I think historically, there's a long list there, but surprisingly, I think it's Tecumseh, and he was a war person, right? He was a warrior. But Tecumseh and his brother, maybe both of them, were a duo, and they influenced tribal groups before the last push from east of the Mississippi River to the west. They influenced tribal groups to come together in ways that they hadn't done before, and he was one that was able to, with the help of his brother, speak to the need for self-determination even before self-determination was a thing, to help people understand the importance of their connection to place. And so, again, long list, but those are the two that come to mind pretty quickly.
All right. Another question. What does it mean to be an Indigenous theologian?
That's a really great question. It means a lot of things, quite frankly. I think there are Indigenous theologians who, first of all, theology literally means the study of God, and that can be also many things to many people. And a lot of folks, though, tag theology or theologian to Christian thought, Christian theology. That's where the word usually goes. And so, and I think that until a few years ago, people were just saying theologian, right? So Vine was just a theologian, and he was Native. Tinker, a theologian, but they were tied to a Christian church body in their training. And so me and some others were like, no, I need for folks to know that, yeah, I'm studying God, but it's really going to come from an Indigenous perspective. That I cannot take off, no matter how much I was missionized, right? No matter how much Christ was placed in front of me as my Lord and Savior, right? And whom I still love, right? And still center in my life. That my relationship with Christ is still governed by how I see as a Native person, how I see as an Indigenous person, how I feel, and how I worship. And I think that part of saying, part of our coining Indigenous theologian or Indigenous theology is to give permission for us to be all that we are. There are Christian people who are just straight up Christian, right? And that's all they know because of assimilation and or because that's what they choose to only know or to worship. And then you have folks who are traditional and not Christian at all. And traditional is even maybe the wrong word, but that's a whole other theological conversation. And they're worshiping in ways of their ceremonies. And then you have people who are little both, right? And so Indigenous theology is about understanding all those pieces and how we all come to understand our relationship with the Creator, maybe our relationship with ceremony, our relationship with Christ through the Indigenous lens. And it's okay to look at the Bible and say, yeah, not all those stories are, fit in my head because I am Native, right? Or I'm going to be cautious of that text because that was the text that said, it's okay to assimilate Indigenous peoples, or it's okay to take Indian babies from Indian mamas, and put them in boarding schools. Or that's the text that said, it's okay to enslave Native people, and it's okay to enslave Black people and keep them enslaved and convince them that that's the case, that it's all right. I'm a Native person. I've got to step back and look at it a little differently. And so, so as Indigenous theologian, I'm constantly maybe reminding the sector, the corner, the part of academia that's theology, that there's a new way, and a new way of looking at Christianity, a new way of looking at theology in general, because for so long they discounted us, our ways of thinking didn't matter. And so I needed for us to say, nope, Indigenous theology is just as important as regular theology, and we're going to tell you what we think, and you're going to listen. Because oftentimes it was the other way around for us. Can't let that happen anymore.
Yes, yes. And I think I have one last question before we try to wrap this up a little bit. What is your view about self-identification as opposed to labels one is born with?
Self-identification versus labels one is born with.
Or born into, sorry.
Born into. Self-identification versus people are born into. So I'll use myself as an example. My mother was very blessed to have born me, in my opinion, for a variety of reasons, and she can list all those for you, I'm sure. But what I'll say is that I say that in jest, but traditionally, if you born, or if you have birthed, or you gave birth to a third gender child, that was a pretty big deal, right? Huge deal. If you don't know anything about third gender in Indian culture, that's another homework you can do, right? What we call third gender people today is two-spirit, not true spirit, not two spirits, two-spirit. That's the contemporary term. I was blessed to know that term at a very early age, even though it's a pretty recent term, and know the people that developed that reclaimed that concept for us, and to help us heal in that regard in our tribal groups. So, and understand the history, right? And even understand us and our own identity, and why we had the way we thought that we did as third gender people. We're a new creation, and we weren't only LGBTQ, right? We are something that was extra special and revered in many cases, not all, but most cases in Indian country, in our tribal nations historically, and we're trying to reclaim even that space in the circle today, right? And I think we're making some headway over time. But so as growing up, I was a boy, I was a son, I was a cousin who was male. I was supposed to play the particular part and play with certain toys. I was supposed to dribble like a boy. I was supposed I was supposed to understand myself as a male and becoming a man, and all those rituals that were not, or unrituals or non-rituals, that carried with it. But as I knew myself as a two-spirit person for a very long time, I also understood at some point I had to define that for myself more solidly, but also for the rest of the world. And while I still, as a two-spirit person, maintain a drag that a man might wear, I am someone who does that on purpose. First may have been for protection for the places that I lived. And the scariness around me, the fear or the danger that might have, influenced me or harmed me. But also, I learned how to be a great ally and a lover of women. And by lover, I mean someone who cares for, especially for women who have been abused. And I knew that if I left male drag behind, then I too get pushed into another category where I'm discounted even more, and unable to be an advocate for women. And so through all that process and understanding myself and my own identity and naming it solidly for myself, I then had to voice that to the rest of the world. And I'm not certainly out loud all the time, but I certainly want folks to know that there were those of us who are third gender, who are two-spirit. And when you see the gifts that I display for the church, or for the world, or for my niece and nephew, or for the city of San Antonio, those are certainly influenced by gifts that the Creator gifted me as a third gender person, as a two-spirit person. And so I had to own that. I had to grow into that, and then I had to relay that and to help folks understand that. And that's still a journey, because so folks are so maybe unaware that even Two-Spirit existed, right? Or what it was. Yeah, so another workshop and some more homework. And so that's one example of what I mean, right? Is I was born into this particular norm. And today even, I'm open to whatever pronoun, right? Call me it, I don't care. But my mother has the right to call me son, and she does, and I'm happy for that, right? And because that's the relationship that we have. But she also recognizes the gifts that the other half of me, or the other part of my being, also offers to the world, and I'm grateful for that as well. But all that to say, the beauty of what you're born into doesn't have to be who you are as you get older. And what I mean by that also is that I think about our Indigenous groups that didn't name babies for weeks, maybe, right? It happened in African cultures as well. Or they named them right away because of something that happened, or dreams that came to grandpa or whatever. And then when they became a little older, they got a different name, right? And then they went through their puberty rites, and they got another name. And then as they became an adult, they got another name. And so so because your person came to the forefront, right? As you grew and matured, your spirit expanded, and things shift and change. And so I think that no matter what you're born into, there's certainly opportunity for you to as long as you understand yourself, and understand the identity that you're going into in a way that's authentic, and that it's real, and that it's affirmed by those around you, it's certainly okay to move into that other place. And to embrace that, and to love that about yourself, and sometimes you'll grieve the loss of the change. Nelson Mandela did that. I'm reading about that now, as he left his childhood, man, that circumcision ritual that he went through as a 16-year-old man, right? And he mourned losing his childhood, but he changed, and he got a new name, Dalibunga, right? And then he became Mandiba. And so, yeah, so own that, love it, love that opportunity, but grow into it and know that it's true for you, or let the community name you.
Yes.
Embrace that for you.
I love that. I think that was the perfect way to end right there. Could you tell everyone how they might be able to get in contact with you if they have some more questions?
Absolutely. Again, I think everybody there on the list, at least here, and so this may be shown somewhere else. So I will say you can contact me through the nonprofit that I created that's based around cultural immersion and cultural education, and that's Otherwise. And so my email address is vance@otherwise.red, vance@otherwise.red, and then of course the website is otherwise.red, and you can see a little bit about what we do there. Of course, I need to update the website, so don't judge me. But I'm happy to have conversations with any who are gathered tonight, or anybody else who might have a chance to watch this particular spot later. So I'm just really thankful again. Thank you so much, and thanks for having me, both Show and you, Tiff, for Tiffany, for the opportunity.
You could call me Tiff. We're there.
Okay, great, good. Well, we're gonna hang out. So.
But thank you so much. Like I am the type of person, I like to learn, I like to research, and you definitely gave me some homework. So I have it written down. I can't wait to dive into it on Google later on tonight. And thank you for taking the time and honoring us with your presence, with your knowledge. I just really thoroughly enjoyed this lecture, this presentation that you gave.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I just want to say thank you, Darcy, for being here, Deborah, Jennifer, my sister Jen, Melissa, Sal, Show, Tim, and of course my family's on here. And so thank you all so much. I love you, and glad that you were joining us. And hopefully I see you again soon, everybody. And Tiffany.
Yes, yes, yes. So everyone who's watching, thank you for tuning in. We hope that, again, if you wanted to go back, you can catch the replay of this. It will be on our Facebook page. And also stay safe, everyone. And also we have, remember, Dream Week, there is over 140 different events. So there is something for everyone, plenty of opportunities for us to all learn from each other. So definitely check out some of the other events. We've had some great conversations earlier today, and I'm excited because I know we're still going to have some more great conversations.
Yeah, it's gonna be great. It's always a great week. Thank you
Yes,
so much.
yes. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.